everybody, welcome back to the Royal Coating and Supply YouTube channel. I'm joined today by Phil from Royal Coating and Supply, and we're going to be talking today about using epoxy for deep casting and woodworking. I'm really excited to find out a little bit more about this.
Ooh, it is everybody's favorite Pinterest idea. I saw some coasters on Pinterest. Can I make them? You sure can.
Wow.
With a little bit of help from Royal Coating.
That's exciting.
Not super hard to do. It's a bit of a learning process. Mixing chemicals, things like that, but should work out for most people.
Excellent. So can you start us off today with a quote?
Sure, I sure can. So a person who never made a mistake, never tried anything new. And I think it's a good quote for what we're going to talk about today.
Excellent. Oh, let's dive right into it.
Let's get it. So, fun fact or statistic, I don't know what fun today, but epoxy products can give you an artistic floor or an artistic finish on a wood piece, right? If it's an optical illusion or swirls or other kind of fancy designs you want to do. And some people would say it's one of the kind of specialities for epoxy flooring.
Nice.
So if you want to have a one-of-a-kind custom floor, custom piece of wood, or custom art piece, or whatever, epoxy is usually the way to go.
That's fantastic. So I've got a couple questions for you about that.
All right.
How should I be preparing my wood?
It needs to be dry as a bone.
All right.
Right? My epoxy, don't like water. Afterwards, fine. Before, not so much of a fan. So just make sure it looks nice and dry. You sanded it down. You removed any imperfections that you don't want to see in your wood. Any oil, like if it had stains on it, oil, whatever, anything that could hinder the bonding process should be removed.
All right.
Yeah.
Perfect. And do I need to use a base coat before I apply epoxy?
So the specific, it's not the epoxy, I guess, it would be the pigment. The specific pigment we're using in the epoxy might look blue, but it's see-through.
Okay.
Right? So if you're making a big table for, say, let's say a dining table, maybe you don't want to see your floor underneath. So then, yes, you're going to make a base coat, a solid color base coat. Doesn't have to be thick, just enough. And then you can do whatever you want over top. But you have a nice, let's go back to blue, nice deep blue underneath. And then when you're looking over it and down, you don't see your floor, you see just looks nice and blue.
Wow.
Yeah? So base coat, not always, depending on your application.
All right. And can I oil my wood before I use the epoxy?
I always recommend after.
Okay.
So finish what you want to do. If, like I said, if you're making a nice side table and you're river casting and you're doing all fancy things with it, and it's been 3 days, it's dry, you've taken off your mold, everything looks nice, you sanded it down, you have it in the dimension you want it to be. Now is when we finish it, so now we can oil it.
Okay.
Put some oil. We recommend walrus oil, there's Odie's oil, there's lots of different brands out there on a rag, usually, and get working.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And what kind of epoxy should I be using on my wood?
That is the big question. So there's lots of different epoxies. We're talking mostly here about deep casting. So most epoxies are not supposed to be poured at like 1 inch, 2, 3, 4 inches.
Right.
They will milk out. So deep casting epoxy is specifically formulated to make sure that you can go, we carry the brand Ice Epoxy. You can go up to 11 inches in one pour and it's still crystal clear.
Wow.
Right. So you can go pretty thick before it starts to milk out or anything happens to it.
So the milk out is what you call it when it gets cloudy.
That's right, because when you're doing deep casting, sometimes you want to cast your, your favorite loonie, right? And you want to make it real thick because then you want to use it as a hockey puck.
Right.
Don't use regular epoxy for it because it won't be clear.
Okay.
So use a specific deep casting epoxy where you can make it nice and thick and it will still be clear and you can still see your favorite loonie in the bottom of that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, and why does it take about 2 or 3 days from epoxy to cure?
Yeah, so because we're pouring so much of it, right? So it's different on a floor.
Right.
Where our coatings are really thin. On a deep casting, woodworking kind of table, we are usually have 2, 3, sometimes 4 inches thick wood that we're pouring rivers into, and that takes a while to thicken up and cure. So there's only so much you can do to increase the speed of that curing, and I usually don't recommend it because a lot of things are happening here while it's curing. There could be some micro bubbles stuck in the coating. They come up as it's curing. Right. So bubbles will disappear over time. There's off-gassing happening. There's all sorts of stuff happening to this coating that you're gonna have to protect it for a couple of days so that it can just do its thing and look for the beautiful Pinterest project that you looked at.
Perfect. So be patient is what you're saying.
Be patient and try not to cut wood next to your curing epoxy.
No sawdust.
No, try not to.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So the epoxy is stuck to the wall. What do I do now?
That's only happened a few times. So honestly, if it's still wet, clean it up with some hot water.
Okay.
So if you notice it right away, clean it up. If it's on like granite, any kind of stone, you can use one of those fancy glass scrapers.
Okay.
Scrape it up. If it's on drywall and you didn't catch it, you're gonna cut that piece of drywall out.
There's no saving it.
There is no saving it.
All right.
You can't really use harsh chemicals on drywall. Doesn't like it.
No.
You could paint over it, but if it's a bump, you're gonna see the bump.
Right.
The only way to fix that, as I said, cut out a square, replace that square, paint over it, call it a day. What we stress so much is if you're doing this inside your house, which some people are doing, and you have hardwood floors, put plastic down. This will wreck your hardwood floor if you're getting it down and it's cured, because you're sanding it off or scraping it, and if you're scraping it, you're scraping your wood.
Right.
If you're sanding it, you're gonna have a patch. So if you're doing this inside your house on a floor that you don't want to have wrecked, and this is your first time doing it, cover yourself up. Cover your floor, cover whatever you can cover.
Cover everything.
Plastics, not that expensive. You can get it in big rolls, right? Painter's plastic.
Right.
Make it look like the Dexter house. Better safe than sorry.
Perfect. So there's some things you can do to save it, but otherwise...
Always easier just to cover everything up. Yeah,
Perfect.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what if I want the see-through epoxy effect? How do I achieve that?
So again, we're using the right epoxy, right? We're using deep cast, no problem. We're using the right kind of pigment powder. So it's usually a metallic powder. Some people call it a mica powder.
Right.
I have seen some people use eyeshadow.
Wow.
Same kind of idea. It's kind of a mica powder. And do I recommend it? Try it out before you put it on something you want.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the way to do it. You mix the right pigment with the right epoxy, and that'll give you that see-through look, right?
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's not rocket science.
The sky's the limit.
The sky's the limit on colors, absolutely. Like I said, I've seen people go to the dollar store and load up on powders and glitters and rocks and all sorts of stuff. They took river casting literally and built a river in their table, like with rocks and moss and little fake fishes and all sorts of stuff, and then coated over top of it. Looks super cool.
Nice.
But some work involved.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And can I put lights in my table if I want like the lit up effect?
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. So usually what I recommend is do whatever you want to do first. Leave about a 1/4 inch. So most people end up using those fairy lights or the LED strips, right? And so do kind of up to about a 1/4 inch. Then put your lights down and then cast over it again.
Okay.
Right? Just so that there's no way for them to sink. Or if you want them at the bottom, do it the opposite way. Put them down first, coat over top of them, and then do everything else.
Wow.
It's gonna look like one piece, one that's all cured anyway, but the lights are in there.
Wow.
So the only thing you'll have to figure out is where to put the outlet plug.
Okay.
Because if you have it coming out of one way of your table, Well, that's the way the table is facing for the rest of its life. So what most people end up doing is they run them inside and then run the cable down. So they kind of dangle in the middle of the table, right? Easy to move an extension cord, things like that from there.
Nice.
But also a little easier to hide.
Excellent. Good to know. And what happens if I don't like the color after I pour it? What can I do?
You pour it again.
Oh, pour it again.
So sometimes on wood it's a little harder to do because you're gonna have to remove that epoxy. Right. Especially if it's a dominant color. So if it's something really light and you're like, oh, I want to try see-through, you don't like it, you can throw some color in there.
Okay.
But once you have the color in there and you're like, I didn't want blue, I want purple, you are cutting that out and you're going again.
Wow.
There is no way to fix that. So it's not like a floor where you can sand it and just recoat the whole thing. And you're like, cool, perfect, done. Or a countertop, same thing. You might not like the epoxy countertop 5 years from now. Let's recoat it. No big deal.
Nice.
You can't really recoat a river that's 4 inches deep in between two pieces of wood.
Right.
So before you have somebody do it or you do it yourself, make small mixes. Get cups, little cups, just to drink, little drinking guys. Make little mixes of color, right? Like, okay, I don't like this blue, I'll add a little bit more powder. Oh yeah, this is the blue I want. Then you go do it. If you just kind of, try it out and you're like, well, this is not what I wanted. Sorry, no way to fix it except doing it again.
Start on some small projects and then work your way up.
Always, yeah. Make some coasters before you make an 8-foot table.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. So
all right.
More fun to do it that way as well.
Well, I have got a Pinterest full of projects that I'm going to try after this. Thanks so much, Philip, for coming by and telling us how to do this project. And hopefully you'll tune in next time for another episode of Royal Coating and Supply YouTube channel. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.